So over the last 6, 8, maybe even 12 weeks, Jonathan and I have talked about the deal flow in multifamily and commercial real estate really grinding to a halt. We've seen buyers and sellers not agree. They're kind of a standoff. I want to step in here and really talk about what I see as a future problem, and that is in the construction, right? We've heard for a long time about all these units coming online, and many of them are. Uh, I've talked about in the daily financial news. Nashville has 10,000 units coming, all of that stuff. But what I'm already seeing in the single family space, and I have to imagine it's coming to multifamily, is people are stopping projects because they can't get funding, right? The source was commercial banks for a lot of these deals, and they are just simply not open for business. So I fear that we're going to have a pretty significant air gap in construction, maybe in 9, maybe in 12 months. And ultimately, that's going to be less supply. So I thought we'd have this conversation with Mr. Jonathan Twombly, who is far more knowledgeable about this space, and see what he's seeing out there. So Jonathan, what are you seeing?
Well, I mean, right now you're just still seeing all the supply coming online, right? Because these projects
True.
have been in the works for a long time. Unlike the single family house market, I mean, these are like battleships, right? And
Yeah.
as opposed to, like a powerboat. And
Mhm.
they have momentum of their own, and they take a long time to get going. So I don't think that there's a lot of appetite for, say, pulling funding from a project
Mhm.
that's near completion,
Oh,
right?
no,
So
quite. Not calling for that at all. Yeah,
yeah,
agreed.
and you did see some of that in the great financial crisis, right? You saw projects that just ground to a halt because their loans got called or what have you. Now, I could imagine a situation in which some of the projects that are ongoing do have their loans called because the banks get in trouble with something
Mhm.
else, right? And they just, where they stop funding because they just don't have the money. That could potentially happen. But I think what's more likely to happen, though, is that banks are going to pull back from lending on new construction deals,
Correct.
and that will have an effect down the road. Now, this happens in every real estate cycle, though. This is just the
Agreed.
typical thing that happens where you get, when the good times are good, the banks are lending, you get a lot of construction, you get into an oversupply situation. Then when the banks see that it's an oversupply, and some of their projects are having trouble, paying their loans back, then they all pull back, and they all pull back at the same time. And the construction kind of cycle is always a little bit out of pace with the actual demand cycle, right? So you wind up, I remember always thinking, like, well, why are they, if they had just kept on building these projects, they'd be in great shape now
Mhm.
because, the economy is really strong, but there's always this lag time. So they'll stop building,
Mhm.
even though the economy has recovered. And then you have this gap while it takes banks that, while the economy is recovering, to feel secure enough to start lending. Then they start lending. The projects take forever to, they've got to go through the permitting process and the construction process, and it's a multi-year process. And then the projects keep on building, keep on going, and supply keeps on coming online even after the economy has, started heading downwards, right? And then you
Yeah.
have this oversupply situation. So yeah, absolutely. I think this will happen. Um, and it usually is a pretty market specific thing, right? So you'll see the construction grinding to a halt in like certain markets because the lending just dries up there because they're in oversupply. So some of those markets that you see, we've talked about, your Austins, your Nashvilles, your Phoenixes, where you've had just a ton of supply come on the market because they were everybody's darling. You'll see construction, once the current projects are complete, you'll see a gap of a couple of years where construction is really down. And you may wind up then with like another supply demand imbalance because people will continue to move to the area. But there'll be less supply of housing, but then it'll start the whole cycle all over again because that imbalance will cause rents to rise. When rents start rising, then the banks get more comfortable, they start lending, and then the whole cycle repeats itself where they lend enough and there's enough construction that there's oversupply and rents fall, and then they stop. So you see this every cycle. There's nothing unusual about what's going on right now, except that interest rates have gone up so fast that an additional compounding factor in this, right? That
Yeah.
maybe you don't see typically, because typically it's just the supply and demand dynamics through the real estate cycle, which cause this to happen.
Yeah. Really what I'm trying to highlight, folks, for here, again, we like to talk about what millionaires on this channel are doing in the real deal, or, you know, every week, every month, every year. And what I'm trying to do with this conversation and with others like my lenders that come on is we're going to create an air pocket in construction, right? We're going to complete what's there, right? They have tranches of money coming due. And again, you know, if they're already, you know, 80% done, they're going to be finished. But there's going to be a year, and I think this time might be a couple of years, where big new projects just aren't happening. And I think I talked about on my daily financial news earlier in the week, something like 47 of the 95 biggest projects that are at pre-construction or breaking ground have paused. Right. So if you're at that point, you're going to be pausing. Now, if the, you know, the structure's there and you're just doing the insides, of course you finish that. But I see some real pain. I think there's a bunch of private builders that will go out of business because they just can't fund. I think there's a lot of multifamily stuff that just sits in mothballs, and this is going to be a problem. And why this is an issue is, you know, we actually, you know, the economy gets growing again, and we, you know, migration starts and people start having babies, and we just need more households grow in 25, 26. This could be a big problem. We'll be right back here with undersupply very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, I think that this is also just kind of always what you get every time.
Boom and bust, right?
You always, boom and bust in construction all the time. But I think that, you know, one probably, I guess, bigger issue is that, and I, you know, well, one bigger issue is that construction has really not kept pace over the last, you know,
correct,
decade or so with population growth. Now, that's, I don't know where this goes, to be honest with you, because if you look at the demographics, the population growth is definitely slowing down right now. Correct. There's definitely like a lag there. Like, how long will it take before that actually makes a difference in the housing market? You know, you're talking about babies not being born now. So this is a 30-year from now problem. Right. But still, you know, we've had this imbalance for quite some time. You know, I think what you're going to start seeing playing out in some of the markets where it's been easier to build, right? So the South and what have you. I think what you're going to start to see happen there is some of the same dynamics that you have in mature markets like New York and California, where they've just run out of space, right? I mean, even though Texas is huge, the space around, say, the metropolitan areas there where people want to be is not unlimited, right? There is some finite limit to the amount of buildable space there. And especially when they're building, you know, very large lot sizes, and then all that gets gets put in amber, right? Like all the zoning is designed around certain lot sizes, and nothing is ever allowed to change, because, you know, the worst thing that could ever happen to anywhere in the world is that it should ever change in any way, right? Once people buy a house there. So you wind up, you know, going from a situation where, you know, it was really easy to build and there was plenty of available land, to where it's not that way. And you're already seeing that in Texas, where people are now talking about, well, you got to move to Oklahoma, right? Because Dallas is so overbuilt. And you also get this issue too, where the place like that, where there's not much public transportation, like you got to drive everywhere, and the commute times get longer and longer and longer, and you're further and further away from wherever it is that you're working. And I don't know, maybe work from home somehow alleviates that somewhat. But if you want to, you know, suddenly everyone's talking about, well, the Dallas metro area is going to grow into Oklahoma, right? Because they're running out of space in around Dallas. So that is a huge limitation on supply too, right? Where you just run out of room, and you're not allowed to build densely, because all those municipalities essentially outlaw density, right? So it just changes, you know, it contributes to the supply problem. That's what I'm trying to say. So
yeah, I really do think, I think people, one of the things I like to do on this channel is try to look around corners and look into the, into the future, given where the tea leaves are today. And I really think, as soon as this time next year, we're going to realize that supply, new units are falling off fast, and there's nothing in the pipeline. That's what I think we'll be talking about in a year. So folks, watch construction financing. Again, we'll be talking to our lenders on it, see if it comes back sooner than I expect, but I don't see a lot of good news. So I think there's a big air pocket coming. But Jonathan, where can people follow you?
Yeah, well, come and join the Apartment Investors Club. Come to apartmentinvestorsclub.com, get on my email list, get the free download that's there. Come to Apartment Investors Club on Facebook and join the conversation, and even go listen to my podcast, which surprisingly enough has the name Apartment Investors Club. So
well done.
I hope to see you there.
Thank you, buddy.